Hi, I'm Elizabeth LaBan, and this is a story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Elizabeth LaBan.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. I really appreciate you listening. If you go to hankgarner.com, you can go through all of the archives, more than 300 shows, author interviews with the very best people in publishing today. On the right-hand sidebar, there's places where you can subscribe for just about every platform that you could possibly listen to the show on. I'd like to thank some sponsors today for their faithful support and for enabling us to bring you quality content like we do. Crystal Watanabe from Pico's House is one of the best editors I've ever met and whose work I really admire. She offers developmental editing, line editing, and beta reading. She's currently booking for May, so go ahead and send her a message now to get your project scheduled with her. She has 4 proofreaders on staff, so she can accommodate authors with much shorter lead time than some other editors do. She's a new affiliate member of the SFWA, and she comes recommended by best-selling authors such as Hugh Howey and Samuel Peralta. Most of her experiences with science fiction, speculative fiction, and middle-grade fantasy, but she really enjoys editing all genres and can really make your project shine. If you will mention Author Stories when booking your editing services, you can receive a $75 discount on manuscripts over 60,000 in length, or a $25 discount on short stories. Pico's House, Pickoshouse. Please tell Crystal that you heard about it on Author Stories. Also, the Debt Collector series by Chuck Buda. Debt is a death sentence. Michael Wright lives the American dream. He works hard every day but still lives paycheck to paycheck. The bills keep piling up, and now his 10-year-old daughter requires surgery to save her life. Michael is in a race against time to find money, but how far is he willing to go? Is he prepared to do whatever it takes? Can he defeat a menacing evil that stands in his way? The Debt Collector series is a gripping tale of psychological horror, raising questions about our modern lifestyles and the terrifying possibilities that hit too close to home. One reader described it as if serial killers and Wall Street made friends. Pay up and die, delinquent, bankrupt. The Debt Collector series is available in paperback and ebook formats exclusively from Amazon, or free through Amazon Kindle Unlimited. Walk Beside Me by Christine Handy. Willow Adair has a picture-perfect life, or so it seems. A stunning model turned wife and mother, she lives in a beautiful home with her husband and 2 kids in historic Bexley, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Columbus, Ohio. On the outside, she has everything. On the inside, she struggles with issues of self-worth. Spurned by her neglectful husband and hated by her rebellious teen daughter, Willow never feels she is good enough. She fears everyone she loves will leave. Walk Beside Me is the story of a woman who peels away the layers to find her inner warrior, a woman who faces insurmountable odds and, thanks to her earthly angels, learns to treasure the gift of God's infinite light and love. Walk Beside Me by Christine Handy. Thank you to all of our sponsors for making the show possible. If you would like to sponsor the show, please go to hankgarner.com, and there's a link in the top menu bar where you can do that. At the end of the show, if you'll stick around, we're going to have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Elizabeth LaBan on the show with me. Elizabeth has a phenomenal new book called Not Perfect, and we're recording this on February 1st, and it is release day for Elizabeth. So we're super happy to have her talking about her new book on the day that it goes out to the world. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to have a chance to talk to you.
Well, thank you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Oh, that's a great question. So for me, I always wanted to be a writer. From the time I was little and, drawing books, In fourth grade, I have a distinct memory of trying to write a book with a friend, and we came up with a character, and we kept, designing and redesigning the cover. And it was about sort of a cool urban kid detective, which is the kind of book I loved to read at that time. Sort of like Encyclopedia Brown at the time. And we never got too far, but I have come upon a lot of those attempts, and I have the covers that we drew, and I have many, little books that I would sort of staple together and try to tell a story. So I would say fourth grade is a very clear memory, but I think I know even before that I was, fantasizing about writing a book of some sort.
I was the biggest Encyclopedia Brown fan in the world,
oh, yeah.
I think, or at least, in my school. At the time, I absolutely loved those books. And it's so funny that you look back and you can always see those little influences that, even if you go on to write a completely different genre, romance or science fiction or whatever, there's, if you were an Encyclopedia Brown fan, there's those little mystery twists and turns in there. I just love that so much.
I loved it too. I just loved reading those books.
So, at fourth grade on, you had it set in your mind that you were going to be a writer. I love when kids get that realization early on, and they have teachers and parents that encourage that. But there's something that happens in high school to a lot of kids, and kind of your spirit gets squashed. That's
true.
And you wind up going to pursue a real job or something like that. Did you always pursue writing?
Well, so it's so interesting about high school, because I would say 9th and 10th grade, my spirit was just completely squashed, and I was not into any of it, really. And then I switched schools for 11th and 12th grade, and I went to a school in Tarrytown, New York called Hackley School. And then everything came back together for me. I got excited about learning again, but still sort of in a quiet way, because, it was still high school, and, people were interested in whatever else, socializing and sports. But my senior year, I had the most amazing senior English teacher, Mr. Arthur Nathing, and he assigned us a tragedy paper, which was essentially sort of looking at Greek and Shakespearean tragedy, and then reading a more modern work and discussing whether tragedy could exist in the modern world. So for some reason, I loved that. And it was the first time that I loved this idea of gathering information and writing about it, putting it together, making sense of it. So I sort of credit him with my wanting to go into journalism, which I did then after college. But interestingly enough, my first novel, which came out in 2013, which was a young adult novel, is called The Tragedy Paper. And it's fiction. It's about students at a boarding school who study Greek and Shakespearean tragedy, and their own personal tragedy unfolds. So now I credit him with also giving me this fiction career. I mean, he really did everything for me. So, as far as wanting to get into journalism and then wanting to write fiction. But for a long time, writing fiction was so daunting. Writing 90,000 words and, putting together a whole world. So it took me a lot longer to get to that point.
Well, a lot of my guests have started in journalism, and I really find that interesting that is a fairly common bridge for a lot of people. You begin. Do you think that it's because journalism appears on the surface to be an easy entrance to writing, because you're observing something that has already happened and you're telling your experience of it, and it's usually shorter form. And then as a lot of us that have written, journalistically or in newspapers and stuff, it's not as easy as it looks. But I think I think it appears to be on the out. Do you think that's the draw for some people?
I don't know, or if it's just, yes, I think maybe that's part of it. And I also think it's a more practical way in, because, when I was starting with my career, I could get a job at a newspaper. And also at that moment, I thought I actually just wanted to be a journalist. I didn't think in that moment, oh, I'm going to be a journalist and then I'll write fiction. At that point, I sort of thought I had made a choice. And I loved it. I mean, partly I think the reason so many journalists become novelists is because they see things, and amazing stories that then they think, oh, this would make a great novel. I could fictionalize this. So I think that's part of it. And I just think, so many people who become journalists love to write. And of course, it is so different. You're writing quickly on deadline and often in a noisy newsroom. But I do think you're right. So many people start out in journalism and then, either always hope to write a novel or something just sparks and they can do it. Or I know tons of journalists who have gone on to write nonfiction books.
Right. What was it that about journalism that just really fired you up?
Well, so I started it in TV news. And I had an internship at NBC News, and then I was an NBC page, which I loved. And then I went on to be sort of entry level in the news division. And I was having a hard time sort of breaking out that role where I was an assistant to people and loved that at the beginning. But then I wanted to do more real work, research or producing. And I found it hard to do. And at the same time, to make that switch. And at the same time, I really wanted to write. I wasn't writing. So at that time, I think I was 23 or 24. I talked to a lot of people, and people advised me to go to journalism school or try to go to journalism school to switch to print journalism. So I did, and I went to Columbia. It's a one-year master's program, and it was just so exciting to be in New York City and reporting. It was a small class, and everybody just mostly was so happy to be there. So then I thought, I wanted to, be a reporter in a city somewhere. And I went on to work at the Riverdale Press, which is a weekly newspaper in the Bronx, which I loved. And then by then I had met the person who would become my husband, so I ended up moving to be closer to him and working at daily newspapers near him. But so it was just sort of a natural progression for me, and I loved the writing, and I mostly love the reporting. I'm not as gritty as a really good reporter needs to be. I did not love the human suffering aspect of it, which you sometimes need, especially if you're at a daily newspaper where you're covering everything. So I think I lacked that. But I love to write fast. I love to report. I mostly loved reporting in schools. That was my favorite, education reporting.
I love it. Looking at your books and your catalog, I see a lot of your books seem to be reflective of you personally or things in your life. That first book that you wrote, the tragedy paper, where you mentioned that a minute ago that that teacher kind of sparked that in you, but where did this story come from?
So, the first novel I ever started to write was The Restaurant Critic's Wife, which then came out after the tragedy paper. But it took me a long time to get it to be where it is now. I did. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say your husband is a restaurant critic, right?
Yes. So he is. Yes. So I should talk about, so yes, it really sparked from, this idea of we're having all these crazy experiences in restaurants. People have always been curious about it. So I sort of started writing scenes, moments, in restaurants, and I was developing the story. It's with that I found my agent, who has been my agent all this time. I've had the same agent, and he has been, as I advise people now when they look for agents to try to find somebody who really wants to work with you and build your career instead of just whatever the one book you're working on at that moment might be. And I was lucky enough to have that experience, not even realizing that I should have been looking for it. So my agent is the one who suggested trying to write a young adult book, and it just sparked. I mean, once I sort of had this idea of the tragedy paper, it came to life. I could picture the world. It is fiction. What happens in that book did not really happen at the school I went to, other than other than writing this tragedy paper. And the English teacher in the book is based on my English teacher, but he's also very different. So some of that came from real life. The kids who were in the book, the main characters, are fictional. I did not know them, and they weren't based on real people. So I really created them. The place and the English teacher were really things that I sort of knew and built on. And then so once that was published, I went back to The Restaurant Critic's Wife, and the funny thing about that is it is a book about people who are married. The restaurant critic they live in Philadelphia, and they have 2 kids, which is exactly what what our family is like. The problem is the great thing is that I'm very happy and we have a lot of fun doing it. But there had to be a story in it. So it was, for me, a lot of fun to make the restaurant critic in the book, Sam Soto, pretty crazy. I mean, my husband is careful to, certainly not be friends with restaurant people and not announce himself when he goes to a restaurant. But Sam takes it to a whole other level where he really doesn't trust anybody. And so that sort of affects the main character, Lila's, whole life. And that causes the tension. So while there's so much that is taken from real life, and of course, I've experienced this now for so long, going to restaurants with my husband, how he manages to put a review together. And a lot of moments are taken from real life. Their true marriage story in the book was made up. And then my next book, Pretty Little World, is about, which I wrote with a writing partner, Melissa DePino, who is a good friend and former neighbor. That's about a small, close-knit street in Philadelphia and neighbors who are great friends. And they decide to take the walls down between their homes and live in a small commune, and sort of what goes right and what goes wrong. They keep it a secret. And so through that, I live on a small street and we're very close to our neighbors. But of course, I never really cut the walls down. Or I shouldn't, but I can tell you I have not cut the walls down. I don't live with my neighbors. So yes, I draw, my novels often begin in a real place and then move into fiction.
Well, it's so much fun to, and a lot of the best novels are rooted in a kernel of truth, and maybe rooted in a real life experience, but it's not strict reporting on the real life experience. I think what it allows the writer to do is to take the real experience and then kind of extrapolate all of the what ifs, that could have happened. And, it allows us to, if I could have done this differently, or if the other person would have done something differently, how would I have reacted? And that's where the imagination just goes wild.
Yes, I agree with you so much that the danger for me when I do sort of begin in a place that's real is to allow myself and remind myself constantly that I do not have to stick to, as you mentioned, reporting the real event, that I can move away from it. And that's something that is really important. Yes, it gives the writer freedom. You can do anything, but Bob thinking, oh, well, so-and-so is going to maybe, imagine herself, so can't do that or this, then I know it's not the right place to have to do something else or create another character, because then I'm going to be bogged down in the real story, and that's not what I want when I'm writing a novel. And so for Not Perfect, which is officially out today, that was a bit of a different experience because there are things that are taken from life. Tabitha struggles with the end of her mother's life and how she handled that. There are moments that I struggled with, but not to the extent Tabitha did. And I worry people will read this and think it was my exact experience. But having said that, Tabitha is somebody I really didn't know before I wrote her. And her experience is fictional. But, having said that, I did like this idea of exploring what would happen if, you think that you're stable, living slightly above your means, and then the bottom drops out from under you. So there's a lot of Philadelphia in the book, which is, where I live and a place that I love. And, there are things that are taken from real life. And there's a whole University of Michigan element to it that comes and goes throughout the book. Which is a personal connection that family has. But the story is different, and in a way, different from a real story that I'm, fictionalizing. And in a way that was liberating. That was something, that I enjoyed. I could do. There were no. It was just a completely freeing experience.
So tell us about Tabitha. How did this character come to you? And you said that you didn't know her before this, and I love it when a character just shows up one day, and then you're like, who are you? And she says, well, this is who I am, and let's go on an adventure together. Where did Tabitha come from, and how did she begin to reveal her story to you?
So my first moment of this book was sort of this idea of people who were living way above their means and loved the life they had built and then ended up stealing to maintain it. But once I started writing that, it didn't work. It wasn't as interesting. They didn't need a lot of the things that they were holding on to. And it wasn't enough. It wasn't what I wanted this story to be. And that was really before I knew Tabitha. So then I realized that Tabitha had to sort of end up alone. And, why was that? And I love mysteries. And I love this idea of lists. Tabitha is a list keeper. So I knew she was stealing because that was sort of something left over from my first idea of the book. And she's stealing very simple things to feed her family, like basil from flower boxes around the city, or bread that's left, in a big sack for a restaurant that's left there early. So when you meet her, she's keeping a list of everything she stole the day before because her hope is to give it all back, or at least pay for it when she's able to. So that was my first moment, having her write this list. I remember running downstairs and writing it down. And then I loved this idea that she was a list keeper. And you learn a lot about the mystery and what happened through another list, which is sort of a list of clues that she keeps. So that all sort of developed, and as that developed, then, other things developed. And I got to know what her marriage was like with Stuart. And I always say that first draft is a little lonely to write because I don't know the people as well. And then when I know them, it's so much fun. So for me, it'll typically be 3 or 4 drafts before I feel that I have a solid draft to show to my agent and then hopefully my editor.
One thing I love about your work is you really weave in this kind of undercurrent of humor that really holds up. And I talk about this a lot because I think about it a lot. When you're dealing with heavy issues, to really engage the reader, I think that you need to give them some moments of levity, to let them catch their breath sometimes. You can only watch someone, suffer and go through horrible situations just so much without thinking that the world, will give them a break every now and then, or just that you can find the humor in tragedy sometimes. And even on the cover of the Restaurant Critic's Wife, you've got this place setting and there's a little plastic spork, beside it, which tells you right off that, this is serious, but maybe doesn't take itself quite so seriously. When you're writing Not Perfect and you're dealing with tragedy and someone's life falling apart, how do you deliver those moments of levity that kind of help the reader stay sane?
I mean, that's a really good question, and I can't plan it. Like, I almost don't know when it's going to happen. But Tabitha is sort of witty, and she thinks, and says sort of wacky things that you wouldn't expect. And I think that's what, that's what brings the levity to it, and sometimes hopefully a chuckle. There's one tiny moment in the book of many moments when she's just been deprived of many things that were very normal before this all happened. So she sort of stopped drinking coffee, and she finds a gift card and goes to Starbucks, hoping that there's still money on the gift card, and gets herself like a crazy big latte, and she's practically high from having not had the caffeine for so long. And she thinks to herself, I didn't really ever like Starbucks. It wasn't my favorite, but it is now. And just, moments like that where she's really suffering, and then she's going to go, she's about to head out and do something that's not so easy to do, but she's, in it, and, the caffeine gives her this buzz. And so there are tiny moments like that, but I almost don't know they're coming until I'm in the scene with her. so I'm so glad that you do, see the humor in the book. I do like that, and but I really don't plan it. I hope for it. I would say that I hope it shows itself.
Well, and you can
I
tell
don't know when it's going to.
Right, and you can tell when it's formulaic. Like, okay, we're at the fourth page. We need a chuckle in the third paragraph. So I love that it just kind of comes organically. When you're beginning a book like this, and am I right? Did the character of Tabitha come first, and how do you start planning out the book when you start kind of realizing the story threads?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So it's interesting. Her name just sort of came to me. I just knew her name, and it stuck. And I just, that helps me so much when I'm forming a character. And I'm sure since you talk to authors all the time, people probably talk about this, that they say there are two kinds of writers, a plotter and a pantser. So a plotter plots everything very carefully, and a pantser sort of writes by the seat of his or her pants. So I would say I'm somewhere in the middle. And so with Not Perfect, I had much more of an outline than I normally do going in. And that was just because there were so many twists and turns in my mind and mysteries that I wanted to solve, that I wanted to make sure that I could sort of see it as a whole. But having said that, I will do an outline and then I'll start writing, and only occasionally refer to that outline, especially if I'm stuck. If I think, okay, I've done all this, what should I start writing today? And a lot of times, it certainly, the finished book does not reflect the outline perfectly. But so with this book, I just had this moment where I knew she was, keeping this first list. And also setting up the scene. She's with her two kids in this very fancy apartment, but she doesn't have any money to really feed them, and, what's going on there. And then she immediately goes to a job interview because, she wants to find a job. She doesn't expect to just be taken care of, and she's not mad about that. She's just so upset with how everything turned out. It wasn't what she expected. And so, then I just, one thing leads to another. Not always so easily. Sometimes I have to say, oh, well, I went down this road, but maybe that's not the right road. Back up a scene or two, go a different way. But I did know the characters. There's a character, Nora, who's an older woman who she meets unexpectedly through a job interview. That happens quickly in the book, in the first few chapters. She's mistaken. The office that she goes to interview in is chaos, and she's mistaken as a home aide and is told to rush to this woman's home. And one thing leads to another, and she does go. And that woman becomes a big character in the book. So I knew she existed. And then everything just sort of, started to form. And then as I'm through that first draft, I always go back to the beginning and, think about what, I know about them, what they would do, and then it becomes a much richer story at that point. Hopefully, anyway.
I think your way of writing is the way a lot of writers approach it. We talk about this pantsing versus plotting, and I don't think it's so black and white. I think a lot of us are somewhere in that middle. And I actually had this conversation earlier this week with my friend Chuck Manley, and he said, I'm a pantser with a plan, and I love that so much. I love that so much. Because
that's funny.
Yeah, like you, I'll outline out the book, or at least really get a firm grasp of story beats ahead of time. But then once that kind of helps you solidify your roadmap in your mind, and then you're free to write. Sometimes you stay on course, and sometimes you take a detour. And but yeah, I think a lot of us are kind of in the middle.
I agree completely. It's true, and sometimes I'm surprised. I don't want to give anything away, but another thing Tabitha talks about is wanting to give back. She doesn't want to just take at this strange moment in her life. And she's very strange things to give. But at one point, she packs up a backpack of her husband's clothes because he's no longer living with them. And and he takes a woman she had seen earlier. They live in Center City, Philadelphia, and give to him. So when I first wrote that was sort of all there was to it. But then that character, the Holmes person who she gives it to, ended up coming back and being sort of a prominent person in a way, and I didn't expect that. So that's always a pleasant surprise when, you sort of put a character in or a scene in, and then you think, oh, this could be so much more. And that happened. So I agree. I didn't see that in the first outline, but then it became important in my continuing to write the book and getting through the story.
The new book is published by Lake Union, which is an Amazon publishing house, one of their publishing houses owned by Amazon. What has your experience been working with Lake Union?
It's been great. So this is the third novel that I've published with them. The first was A Restaurant Critic's Wife. So all my women's fiction. So The Restaurant Critic's Wife, Pretty Little World, and now Not Perfect. And I've had the same editor throughout, and it's been great. I mean, it's a traditional model in the sense that they acquire books and offer an advance, and then you hopefully earn back the advance. The thing that is outstanding is that their marketing is so amazing. I mean, I felt very supported by them, also with publicity, and the editors, and the editing process was, has been very good, and the cover. But in addition to all of the traditional things, I mean, the marketing is amazing. So, it's been great. I've had a great experience with them, and they've been supportive, and I've been very happy with the end products of the book, and I hope to continue to work with them.
I'm sure there's a disgruntled author out there somewhere, but all of the folks that I've ever talked to that are working with one of the Amazon ARM publishers have nothing but great things to say. They really seem to have put together a quality, publishing arm. So that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, no, I feel very lucky. And just this idea of getting the word out. I mean, they do such an amazing job. I mean, hopefully you hope, but they have the ability to, in a great way.
Sure. So the new book, Not Perfect, is out today, the day we're recording this. So when you are listening to this show, it is available. You can go pick up a copy of it right now. It's in Kindle Unlimited, which is fantastic. We've got a lot of Kindle Unlimited subscribers that listen. So you can go listen to it for free there, or you can buy the Kindle edition or paperback on Amazon right now. What do you hope people take away from this book?
I mean, I think about this so often, but I think what I hope people take away is just this idea that even if somebody's life looks perfect, the person across the street or the person you see on Facebook, it doesn't mean it is, and it doesn't have to be. Or if your life doesn't seem perfect, and you're wondering why everyone else's does, that's okay. And sometimes you think it's perfect, and then it sort of all falls apart, and you realize it never was, and now it can be something totally different and better. I have two teenagers, and they're both constantly on, my daughter more than my son, but on social media, and everybody makes everything look so good. College is perfect. All the parties are great. And it's just not that way. I just don't believe it's that way for anybody.
Every family dinner is perfectly balanced and everyone's dressed up. Yeah, right.
Every school lunch that you see someone send on Facebook is, nuts and berries and lettuce and, perfect. So, it's just this whole idea of, how it looks from the outside is not necessarily how it really is on the inside. And more than that, a journey that you think is starting out as something that you would never wish for can take you to a possibly great place.
Right. Elizabeth LaBan, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. The new book is Not Perfect. It is out now. Where can people find you if they want to read up more about you, follow you online, or things like that?
Oh, that's so nice. So I'm on Facebook, Elizabeth LaBan author page, and Twitter @Elizabeth LaBan, and Instagram @Elizabeth LaBan. I also have a website, elizabethlaban.com.
Excellent. Elizabeth, we're going to send everybody to see you and to pick up a copy of Not Perfect. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so much fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
They sat in silence, leaning on Spook Rock. It pulsed against his back, in rhythm with his heart. He fought an urge to press his palms to it and steal its mysteries. Kate took her hand away. This fundraiser for my father's campaign, was it your idea? No, I didn't think so. You need to watch out. For what? She stood and paced, hands in pockets, avoiding his eyes. Right now, you're a free agent. Nobody knows what you can do except me and Joey. That's rare. You've got space to find your own path, without everybody watching you or controlling you. How many of them, us, are there? A few handfuls of families. We used to be all over, but we're kind of dying out. The secrecy issue makes it hard for us to find each other, hard to find people to marry and the like. So we congregate in a few obvious places. Salem, Sleepy Hollow. Transylvania? Don't be stupid. There's no monsters, just people. And ghosts. Ghosts are people. They were. She held her arms out. That's all there is. People in the spirit world. And places in between. Magic places, haunted places. Like this. We gravitate to towns where we can stick together. It sounds nice. It can be smothering. We have factions. Not all of us want to get by in peace. Some of us, my father is one, say we need to be more aggressive. Increase our numbers. Take charge of things. Politics, finance. Fix the world. People listen. They think they're special. They don't call themselves the gifted. They call themselves the appointed. As if God singled them out to rule. My dad's a good man. He just thinks he knows what's best for everybody. And you'll be meeting his crowd. At the fundraiser. It will be mixed, mostly normals, but I'll point out the dangerous ones. My father employs a man named Mather. You can't miss him. He has purple eyes. Mather is like this rock. He'll be able to sense you. If you want to stay a free agent, you'll need to avoid him. Or else what? They'll want to recruit me? You're Ichabod's descendant. Ichabod was attacked and survived, a potential founder. They're already watching you. I'm no good to anyone. You don't believe that. Neither do I. She knelt and pushed the hair out of his eyes. What am I going to do with you, Jason Crane? Love me, he thought. He felt himself lean forward. They would kiss, here in this sacred place, beneath the stars. Stars? Stars? What time is it? Jason jumped to his feet. We need to go. Why? A firefly swept the air, flared yellow-green, and died. What's wrong? She followed his gaze and gasped. Fireflies swam in every dark crevasse. Faces coalesced where the lights hovered. Faces of crones and young boys and stern men. Emaciated, hale, wounded, vacant, menacing, piteous. Bodies took form. Military uniforms, bonnets, black lace, crepe, shrouds, winding sheets. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery had disgorged its dead, and that grand army of spirits now made camp at Spook Rock to await orders from their leader. A laugh chopped the wood of the forest. Jason had heard that laugh before. He squeezed Kate's hand. Run.
Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Troy is no longer himself. Kidnapped by aliens infected with the essence of the dead General Tomaz, Troy grasps at his only hope of survival. He merges his soul with the alien parasite trying to possess him, leaving him forever changed, and not entirely for the worse. Once plagued by crippling phobias, Troy is now fearless, willing to fight his enemies with his bare hands. But with his new strength also comes a new weakness: women. Tomas was notorious for his insatiable desires, and Troy finds himself constantly resisting temptation, especially the gorgeous, manipulative Alta. Although Alta has convinced the Pyrrhans she's helping them prepare to battle the murderous Reptarans, she's actually meticulously planning to steal their ultimate power source and then abandon them to their fate. Alta won't hesitate to kill anyone in her way, and her deep love for Tomas is Troy's only advantage. He convinces Alta that Tomas has taken full control of his being and thus keeps her trust and his life. While Alta schemes, Troy covertly struggles to save the Pyrrhans and prevent the Reptarans from invading Earth. But first he must wrest back control of his own soul. Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Find it on Amazon today. There's a link in the show notes.